So is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello everyone. So today I'll be talking about this Bags of Hole paradox. So let me give a very general introduction first. So what is a black hole and its horizon? So consider the future asymptotic region of a space-time. This can be understood as the place where light rays end. So, for example, in flat space, it can be the future null infinity or the time like infinity for areas. Now, a black hole is defined as now if we take the complement of the causal past of this particular region, which is the future asymptotic region, that region is the black hole interior, and its boundary is the horizon of a black hole. Now, why should we bother about horizons of a black hole? So basically, the entropy of a black hole is given by the area of the horizon, and this was discovered by Bekenstein and Hawking. So the entropy basically in natural units, it goes like the area divided by the 4. And black holes also evaporate away completely in the absence of infalling matter or radiation. This was shown by Hawking. Now, the existence of black hole interiors raise important questions about the physics of information in the presence of gravity, colloquially known as information paradoxes. In fact, all information paradoxes arise due to the existence of the black hole interior bounded by the horizon. So this is why we should bother about horizons and black holes in general. Now, there is another motivation to study information paradoxes. It is basically to understand various quantum aspects of gravity. So apart from being puzzles on their own, information paradoxes are a fantastic arena from which we can sharpen our understanding of the following aspects of gravity. The list include these aspects of gravity include, these are not exhaustive by the way, so non-trivial features of semi-classical gravity as compared to standard quantum field theory, such as non-locality of gravity, black hole complementarity, non-factorization of Hilbert spaces, description of states in the black hole interior and consequences, implication of gravity's uniqueness, such as the absence of local observables in gravity, the Hamiltonian being a boundary term, and so on, and the role of string theory setups for gravity, which is essential for UV completeness, as well as non-perturbative aspects of quantum gravity, such as holography, etc. So this serves as another motivation to study information paradoxes. Now we will briefly give an overview of the talk and briefly describe what is the bags of gold paradox. So the
Excuse
paradox
me.
is a corner of the interconnected web of puzzles regarding the black hole
Sorry,
interior.
excuse me.
I think there's a question. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
No, no, I don't want to ask something. There is this flashing of the screen that seems to be happening. I wanted to know if it's just for me, because uh, if it's just me, then I will fix something at my end. But I feel that the screen that is being shared is flashing every once in a while.
Oh,
If
oh.
it's just me, then I will try to fix something at my end. But I would
So
like to know
is it
if
flashing
others
for
are.
everyone?
Not for me.
I didn't notice. Yeah, not for me. I think it's
Oh,
probably at your end.
okay. Then I guess it's at mine. Okay, fine.
Okay.
All
So let me give you a brief overview of the talk and what is the bags of gold paradox in general. So this was formulated by Wheeler and expanded upon by a nice review by Marolf in 2008. And the paradox is the corner of the interconnected web of puzzles regarding the black hole interior. Basically, certain space-like slices which go inside the black hole interior become very large in volume at late boundary time. These slices can host a considerable number of semi-classical excitations far higher than what the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy suggests, which leads to the paradox. On a related note, we will also show that an effective field theory treatment of these bags of gold excitations violates spectral observables expected features leading to inconsistencies. And the proposed resolution to all of these puzzles, which I just described, is basically overcounting of interior excitations. The idea is that semi-classical bulk states placed far apart from each other in the interior are seemingly orthogonal. However, these states have small and significant inner products between them, which deviates from the semi-classical expectation of zero inner products. So this resolves the paradox in the spectral observables as well. Further, from the boundary perspective, there is no paradox as we will see from the fine-grained entropy. We'll demonstrate our proposed resolution in the context of small and toy matrix models, where we model the construction of these large number of excitations and also comment on the initial state. So this diagram is a brief, is a idea, it gives a pictorial overview of the bags of gold paradox for eternal black holes. The left figure displays the maximum position on space-like slices, which have large volumes, for the eternal ADS Schwarzschild black hole. The volumes of these slices increasingly grow with boundary time t, becoming very large at late times. The figure on the right demonstrates the bags of gold paradox for the eternal black hole on the maximum volume slices. We can show that when we can accommodate an increasingly large number of excitation is far apart from each other on these slices, leading to the paradox. So let us go to the construction of these so-called maximum volume slices. So we will work with the ADS Schwarzschild metric in d plus 1 dimensions, which is given by equation 2, where f of r is this and r star is the tortoise coordinate. The subscript k of these uk and vk denotes the Kruskal coordinates. So since the increasing volume is associated with only the interior, we compute the maximum volume slices which end at u0, 0 on the left horizon and 0, v0 on the right horizon in this figure on the right. We'll set u0 is equal to v0 using the isometry of ADS. Our goal is to show that the interior's volume grows as we increase u0. We end up with the following expression for the volume, which was done in a variety of complexity papers, for example, the papers by Stanford Susskind, Carmi et al., and so many other papers. And the basic idea is that the volume grows proportionally to log of u0, where k and O1 are terms of order 1 which do not grow with u0. So basically at late times, if we take very large u0, the volume essentially grows proportionally to log of u0. So since the volume of the nice slice in the interior, so basically these slices are nice slices. So nice slices are defined as slices which stay away from large curvature invariants, including the singularity everywhere. So since the volume of these nice slices in the interior keeps increasing with the Kruskal time, the interior can accommodate an increasingly large number of semi-classical excitations placed far apart from each other, such that their spatial overlaps with each other are essentially zero. At late times, the slice's volume goes to infinity, and therefore a huge number of excitations can be placed far apart from each other. So these interior excitations are created by acting with unitary operators on the right CFT in the thermophile double state. So the thermophile double state is the state of this eternal black hole. So equation 4 describes an interior excitation, which is basically the state. So equation 4 is basically interior excitation, which is Kyriakos and Subrat wrote a lot about. It is inspired from their state-dependent construction. And this state has, like, where u1 is the unitary operator acting on the right CFT, C is the normalization constant, HR is the right CFT Hamiltonian, and TFT is the thermophile double state.
Jaideep?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a naive question. So why is it important that they have no spatial overlap?
Why is it important that we have no spatial overlap? So we will just discuss this in the next slide. Why is it important?
Okay, sure.
So
Okay.
yeah, let me postpone your question for a minute, right?
Okay, yeah.
So now this unitary operator u1 in equation 4, this controls the position of these excitations on the slice, and this control results due to the fact that the time-like coordinate t in the exterior becomes a space-like coordinate in the interior. So we can now create another excitation in the interior, which is by taking this u1. So this u1 t1, we can now shift it and get the expression using the bracket inside the bracket. So basically in equation 5. So basically we have this, we modulated this factor by using factors of e to the power plus minus I HRT. And the action of the Rindler Hamiltonian using these factors spatially separates this second excitation from the first one. Now, since the exterior time-like coordinate becomes space-like in the interior, these excitations are placed far apart from each other if t is large enough, and we will generate m number of such excitations similarly, with each excitation placed far apart from the previous one as a result of modulating with these factors, where t denotes the time difference between consequent excitations.
Sorry, Jaideep, can you explain a bit more about the expression for psi that you have, like the previous one also, for the single excitation also? So
Yes, yes.
how I mean, so how do I think about this excitation? So they're not
Yes, yes.
like created by a creation operator. Instead, you have like e to the power beta Hamiltonian acting on it. So can you explain what's
Yes,
happening?
yes. So let's say that we forget about this e to the power beta hr by 2, both of these. So if we consider just this state u1 of t1 acting on the thermophile double, that represents some state in the right exterior, where I call this part the right exterior, the part which is on the right. So now these factors of e to the power minus beta hr by 2 plus minus beta hr by 2, what they do is they push the state beyond the horizon. You can think the action of these two as pushing the state behind the horizon. So,
Okay, but why should I think of a unitary operator acting on the thermophile double state as an excitation?
well, I'm calling it an excitation, but basically you can call any state, if you have some state which is living in the right exterior, let's say, you will denote it by something like u1 t1 acting on tfd, right?
There is one state, yes.
Yes. So I'm just looking at these states. Maybe excitation is a bad terminology, but okay, I'm looking at these kind of states.
Okay.
I think given an excitation, you can always find some unitary operator which takes you from this state to that state, right?
No, I mean a creation operator acting on.
No, the
The
creation
state is not.
operator itself, no. Creation operator itself is not unitary, but there will be some unitary which will take you from ground state to the first excited state.
That is the
Not
creation
sure
of
if that is true.
Right? Yeah. I mean, that is like you can just construct a unitary operator that takes you from this state to that state.
no, but taking from the ground state to the excited state, as you said, involves this a dagger kind of thing, which is unitary operator, right?
No, a dagger is not a unitary operator. But what I am trying to say is that you can construct a unitary operator which does that operation as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're given a large enough Hilbert space.
Yeah, that's what.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
right. Yeah.
Yes.
But it may not act as a excitation on it, right? In that sense.
Yeah, it may not act as an excitation. Maybe excitation is not a very good terminology
No,
to use in this context.
what I mean is, suppose you have an energy basis, right?
Yeah.
In energy basis, you would have some polyflip kind of a matrix, right? Which would take sigma x, which would take you from I mean, it's 0 1 1 0, right? It will take ket 0 to ket 1, and it will take ket 1 to ket 0. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but ket 1 can also be written as a dagger of ket 0, which is a different thing altogether, right?
Yeah, I'm saying that if you have a creation operators labeled by momenta, then you have to define a unitary that does it for all the momenta, and then you have to have like a sufficiently large Hilbert space.
That is required. Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Okay, please go on.
Yeah. So basically, the action of this e to the power minus beta hr plus minus beta hr by 2, this push the unitaries inside the horizon. So this is the basic idea of this state independent construction, that you are looking at operators u1 which have support outside this black hole region, and hr has support on the boundary of ADS, and you are using this particular combination to push inside, so and constructing the interior excitations. So, and these factors of e to the power minus I HRT, they shift this, they basically they spatially separate this thing. We'll now generate m number of such excitations similarly. So let me go to briefly look at the physical, let me go to the physical picture of the paradox. So consider an excitation created at time t1. So this excitation proceeds into the interior of the black hole and intersects the nice slice. Other excitations are created at T2, T3 up to Tm. We can generate these excitations such that the back reaction is very small as compared to the mass of the black hole, and the condition for that, if we have m excitations, is given in equation 6. So we will ensure that the density of the excitations rho, which is m divided by v, is a finite quantity in the thermodynamic limit, that is with m and v very large. So fixing the density allows us to calculate the entropy of these excitations in the effective field theory approximation by treating the system as a dilute gas of excitations living on the nice slice of the black hole. And we can compute the expression for the entropy in the microcanonical ensemble using the suburb dilute gas approximation in equation 7. But if finally we end up at this entropy going proportional to the volume as denoted by the
Jaideep, so this spatial separation was important for this treating it as a dilute gas.
Yes. So it is maybe just in the next slide. Yeah. It's just
Okay.
in the next.
Okay. Fine. Okay.
Yes. Okay. So now the paradox. So now we will briefly motivate the resolution, which is basically the overcounting of interior excitations. And this is basically due to small inner products.
Joydeep, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yes. What is how do you define this mass?
How do you define the mass?
This by V thing, like.
Yeah, you can look at the stress energy of each of these operator insertions. So you can take the OP of this operator insertion.
I'm just confused between the difference between E0 and M.
Between easy. So no. The M is the number of excitations.
Oh.
We have M number of excitations, so each having energy of the order of E0. Let's say.
Okay, thanks.
So this should be less than the ADM mass. That's all I'm saying in equation 6.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me briefly motivate this small inner products motivation. So the paradox arises due to a huge overcounting of the bulk Hilbert space. In semi-classical gravity, the inner product between two bulk states is given by something like this. So what are these states G0 mu nu and GCL mu nu? Basically, these states can be thought of as states in the. So let us write down the. First of all, we can think about the linearized Einstein equations. So these linearized Einstein equations can be solved in terms of this creation and annihilation operators. And the states G0 and GCL are the coherent states which are of this produced by exponentiating the creation and the creation operators and the annihilation operators respectively. And we know that these two coherent states in any general quantum system should have an exponential fall off if these states are taken far apart from each other. So let's say that we are taking two states, two coherent states. Let's say for electrodynamics, if we take two completely different classical configurations corresponding to completely different classically electrodynamics configurations, their overlap between these two states is essentially it's zero. But however, this description is very misleading however, this description is very misleading in gravity, especially when the phase space distance between the corresponding classical configurations is very large. So we wanted to separate these two states by a very large distance. But the point is, like, even in gravity, if we take these two states to be separated far apart from each other, the overlap is not exactly zero. It does not fall off as something like exponential of this thing, but there is a saturated fat tail of the order of e to the power minus n. However far you take these take two states up from each other, however distinct they are, however far apart these two states are, these will always have a small overlap. So this was shown by Kyriakos and Sumrat in a particular paper. And basically the idea is that the inner product do not go to zero, but develop a saturated fat tail. And this really is the motivation for overcounting and consequently explains why the bags of Bol excitations are not really independent. So yeah, so Subramania, that was your maybe.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jaideep, I had a question. Can you just go back to those excitations again? So just trying to understand. So you're saying that you're creating these excitations in the thermophile double state.
Yes.
And then is a unitary operator at some point t, some boundary time t, right?
Yes.
So what I'm trying to understand is like, and then you're creating different excitations at different times, different boundary times.
Yes.
And then you're saying that we should think of all these as in the bulk lying on the same nice slice. So how do we see that all of these are lying in the same nice slice?
Yes. So
yeah,
basically this happens because if you take because this signs flip, the space-like separation becomes time-like and the time-like separation becomes space-like. So if we take a huge boundary time-like separation between two different excitations, this will, in the interior, it becomes space-like separation on this slice.
I see. Oh, okay. So you're separating them in time in the boundary, and then they propagate and become space like separated in the bulk. And then you're saying that we can somehow consider them to be on this particular time slice. But how do you why that slice and not some others? This is one slice. You're saying this is one slice where we can do this.
So the space-time is foliated by these various nice slices. You can think of the space-time as foliated by these various nice slices.
Right.
So these excitations will keep intersecting all these nice slices.
Okay. Okay. So,
for this given boundary time t, there is one slice. Is that what?
oh, that is not true.
T.
Oh, is okay. So are there different nice slices for a given boundary time t?
So the point is, like, here we have done certain extremization. So corresponding to boundary time t, there is only one slice.
Okay.
Because we extremize the volume. These are the maximal. That in that sense, it is the maximum volume surface. So given a particular boundary, there exists one particular surface.
I see.
But this is not the time t, the same t. That is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. This t is not that same t. This is some excitations t.
Okay.
This is an intrinsic property of the excitation.
Oh, okay.
So this problem is defined. I mean, to define this problem, you have to define a particular slicing, and then you have to say that on this slicing, I mean, on this foliation, there's a problem.
Precisely. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at this maximum volume slices because they will, you can accommodate the worst. You can do the worst possible case of overcounting in there. You can put in as many, like you can increase that has the maximum volume, so that is the most extent up to which one can go in a certain sense.
But Joydeep, shouldn't the state have some parameter which will tell you which slice it is in? Like, so in that sense, shouldn't this T1 be related to that?
No, the states will keep propagating in the interior as well. So they will keep intersecting this all.
Yeah, there should be some parameter which captures that information, right? Because the TFD state doesn't do that.
That parameter is sitting inside this T1 itself.
Okay.
That parameter is the T1 itself.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
U1 of T1, more precisely. It's a U1 of T1. That is the parameter in a certain sense. It's contained.
Okay. Okay, fine. And how do these become coherent states? Are you saying these states are coherent states?
Okay. So this coherent states. Okay. So let's say we have let's say you have a certain classical state, the classical configuration. The corresponding state to that is the coherent state. So if we have some set of classical,
I see. Okay.
On this slice, such that their back reaction is very small, those can be thought of as coherent states.
Okay, that I understand. Okay, fine. Okay, thanks.
The important fact about this is that the inner product between two different coherent states in gravity does not go to zero. It develops a saturated fat tail, and that is basically all these things can possibly be accommodated. So now let us calculate how many bulk excitations can we have. So we will demonstrate how many bulk excitations can be fit inside the interior using a much smaller Hilbert space. So consider the following problem. In a Hilbert space of dimension n, what is the maximum number m of vectors vi which satisfy the following relations? So the relations are basically vi is a unit vector, and the overlap between vi and a vector vj, the modulus of the overlap is less than epsilon for all I not equal to j. So the solution to this problem is as follows. So unit vectors in the Hilbert space live on the surface of a 2n-1 dimensional real sphere. We can obtain a naive estimate for the number of unit vectors that satisfy the inner product bound by dividing the surface area of this 2n-1 dimensional real sphere with the area of something which we call the exclusion zone. So the exclusion zone for each vector has a radius of epsilon by 2. So the exclusion zone is basically a zone around a vector in which no other vector can live, such that it satisfies the bound in equation 9. So Vi inner product of Vi Vj modulus is less than epsilon. And we divide this surface of the surface area of this 2n minus 1 dimension sphere with the radius of the exclusion zone. And this gives us a formula which describes the maximum possible vectors for a very small epsilon in equation 10. So let us just pause a while and appreciate what this formula seems to tell us. So if we consider even a very small system with a dimension e to the power s is something of the order of 10 to the power 5 with inner products of the order of e to the power minus s by 4, then we can fit in a huge number of excitations, which is something like of the order of e to the power 300, which is a huge number, like far more sizable than the number of atoms in our known universe. So it's like one can use this formula to obtain gigantic violations of, like, you can embed a huge number of huge number of vectors in a very small dimensional Hilbert space. So let us take a small detour and look at why there is no paradox in the CFT. So recall this expression in equation 5, and the expression within, let us define this expression within the brackets as something as VI's. So we will define this VI as this expression within the bracket in equation 11. Now this multiple m number of excitations in the interior can also be written as an action of a single interior operator on the thermophile double state. And this follows due to the form of the interior X operators, which is given in equation 12. And we can now calculate the reduced density matrix of this right region for this system of excitations, which is basically taking a trace over the left region of this thing, and we'll obtain the thermal density matrix itself. One can see that the entanglement entropy has not really changed upon the insertion of these excitations, because if you again obtain the thermal density matrix. And we expect the thermal density matrix to remain unchanged under interior operator insertions, because the thermal behavior arises due to the horizon's existence and is irrespective of insertions in the interior unless a large back reaction changes the horizon. The fact that the fine-grained entropy is preserved can also be seen using the expression for the generalized entanglement entropy, since the extremal surfaces for the entropy of the right side CFT do not go inside the interior, and thus there is no paradox in the CFT.
Sorry, I didn't understand. Jadip, can you go back to the slide? I didn't understand that point. So you're saying thermal density matrix remains unchanged under interior operator insertions. And why is this happening?
Because the thermal behavior really arises due to the horizon's existence and is irrespective of insertions in the interior unless a large back reaction changes the horizon.
And how do we see this from the CFT side?
From the CFT side, it is clear from equation 13. So basically, if I see this, take the states in equation 12 and trace the left side out, basically I obtain the thermal density matrix, and we can see that the von Neumann entropy of the right region really does not change.
Right. So these B's are all unitaries.
Yeah, but if we are going, so this kind of states which Subrat and Kyriakos wrote down for the interior, basically these are states in the semi-classical approximation in which we are not looking at very large back reaction. So if we go out, if we have a large back reaction, then this whole prescript formulation is not valid. So this will obviously change the.
And how do you see that it does not have a large back reaction from the CFT side?
Oh, because we have demanded this condition in the first place, equation 6, that the excitations have a very small energy of the order of this.
Yeah, but from the CFT side, how do you?
Even on the CFT side, you have it. So this condition sits inside the form of this operator's u of t. So this is basically a constraint on the form of the operators u of t, which you can have, and you can see that by from the CFT side. Oh, okay. From the CFT side, you can say that these operators are like you do not have a. These are like single product of single trace operators, in which the product order of the in which the product of single. So this u of t1 can be seen as product of single trace operators in which the number of single trace operators is very, very small as compared to n square.
Okay.
So that's what you impose on this U of T1, that you have a very small energy as well as the product is like not a, you do not multiply a very large number of single trace operators to get this U of T1.
And if that was violated, you're saying that it would change.
Yeah, so we cannot use this particular formulation, first of all. We cannot write down states using this particular equation 4.
I see.
And so we cannot make any statements about the entanglement entropy like that, like
But
calculation.
user unitary operators which are only acting on one Hilbert space. It
Yes,
won't change the
yes,
thing,
but
right?
this whole state description, state dependent formulation is valid only when these two conditions are obeyed. That is, the energy of these states are very, very small as compared to the black hole's mass, as well as the product of these single trace operators sitting inside U of T1 is like the order of the number of products is like much, much less than n square.
Yeah, I mean that I understand. But I'm trying to see if this is violated, whether entanglement would change or not. If these conditions are violated.
You mean like
That
if
was
you
the
want to
question.
go beyond the state-dependent formalism, what should you write down as as the form of an excitation?
Okay, and
Is that
who's
what
gone?
you're asking?
Yeah.
Joydeep,
Yeah,
I have a question. So this you were saying that this e to the power beta HR by 2, these factors, they push the excitation to the interior, right?
yes.
So when you go from equation 12 to 13, like if you did not have these factors,
Yes.
So does this mean you won't get the thermal density matrix?
Right.
I see. Okay. Because I mean, because this statement is probably specific to interior excitations. Is
Yes,
okay.
yes.
I see.
You were asking something, maybe.
No, my question was that, I mean, how do you see from like 12 that if you don't obey those conditions, you
Yes.
don't get the thermal density matrix? That was my question.
That can be seen from, okay, so first of all, the first thing would be that the equation, we cannot write equation 4 in the first place.
Okay.
So since we cannot write an equation 4, we cannot write equation 12 also, because we cannot insert all these states like this.
You mean the psi E would not have an interpretation as a
Yes.
valid excitation?
Yes.
Okay.
So we won't have the precise form of this thing. Like this is really going beyond the semi-classical approximation. So yeah, we don't have a nice prescription for how to go beyond the semi-classical approximation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question. So,
yes.
Can you rephrase this no paradox thing? There's some, there is no overlap. I mean, the overlap between two states in the CFT is 0. I mean, unlike what you had in the bulk, where you had overcounting and there was a non-zero overlap.
So the point is like, what happens in the CFT? Basically, so if you take these two states corresponding to two CFT states corresponding to the bulk states, so what happens is these states also have a very small overlap. Like one can show this explicitly. There is, however far you place two states apart in the time in the CFT, these states will have a very small overlap.
So even in the CFT, you're saying there is some overlap.
Yes, the states of this form. Even in the CFT, if you take two states, one state is given by, let's say, equation 4, another state is given by equation 5. If this parameter T, capital T, is very large, even then you can show that there is a very small overlap between these two states. In fact, that is what motivated this particular fat tail discussion.
I see. Okay.
Okay. So let us now look at the qualitative nature of these excitations. So these states arise, basically these states arise from the past left horizon and end up at the future left horizon. This state is out of equilibrium at time t is approximately equal to t1. And yeah, let me just show you the bulk picture, physical picture of the excitations. It's something like this. So here the bulk excitations denoted by the orange and the magenta lines arise from the left past horizon and fall into the left future horizon. So the states come out of the equilibrium at say time approximately equal to T1 and T2 if the unitaries have this T1 and T2 sitting inside for the orange and the magenta excitations. In the bulk, this out of equilibrium behavior is indicated by how far the excitation protrude out on the left. The unitaries U1 and U2 control the position of the excitation on the slice, and the large time difference leads to a large spatial separation. And notice that these interior excitations at late times are visible only to later slices. So let's say that we have this orange excitation. It does not intersect the blue slice, but it intersects the violet slice. So we can keep on adding more and more excitations in the interior at later and later times in this fashion. And this leads to the paradox. We can keep putting in more and more excitations at later and later times, and you can have a huge overcounting of the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy. Like we can have a huge counting. Yeah. So this picture basically says it has one particular defect. The defect is that it naively seems that the excitations emerge out from the past singularity. So there is a way to resolve this problem. The way to resolve this problem is to look at an initial state of these excitations. And the initial state of the black hole is created, plus the excitations is created by gluing the Euclidean ADS to the bottom half of the Lorentzian-Penrose diagram. So boundary deformations of the Euclidean ADS marked by this crosses on the Euclidean boundary, these create our excitations, and just after the initial time, all these bags of gold excitations are there in the left exterior. So this is how we look at the initial state. So now we come to the paradox for the pure state black holes. So single-sided black holes, so pure state black holes are basically the single-sided black holes. So the single-sided black holes are represented by pure state, I mean the single-sided states, black holes, this was a typo. So basically I'm looking at now the single-sided black holes. Earlier I was looking at these eternal black holes, now I'm looking at this single-sided black holes. So the single-sided black holes are represented by typical states on the boundary CFT, which are defined by randomly superposing these energy eigenstates in a particular interval. Let's say we have a particular interval E plus minus delta E. So I'm taking this energy eigenstates which lie inside this E plus minus delta E interval. I'm picking out these energy eigenstates and I'm randomly superposing these energy eigenstates as given in equation 15. So this defines a typical states where the Ci mod of Ci square is 1. So here the Ci's are all chosen at random. Now these typical states obey a surprising property, that is, for a quantum statistical system, almost all the states which are given in equation 15 mimic thermal behavior, and the thermal behavior is given as in equation 16, which is like if you insert like k operator insertions, this will exactly have the expectation value which is given by the trace over k operator insertions in a thermal density matrix plus some order of 1 by s correction. So here the number of operator insertions k is much smaller than the entropy of the state, and the paradox for the pure state black holes is similar to the Eternal's case, since both of these black holes share the same interior and consequently have the same maximum volume slices. So the way we motivate the paradox here is the same as for the Eternal case.
Sorry, this e to o order of 1 over s, or is it order of e to the s, or is it 0? I guess that depends on the operators which you're using.
So here I'm looking at this this thing. Here I'm looking at this canonical formulation of this. So it's order of 1 by s. You are asking about the order of 1 by s, right? In equation 16.
Yeah. I mean, where does this come from? I mean,
so one can basically show, one can basically use these typical states and look at this operator product inserting and look at the expectation value of all these operators. And if you take the CIs appropriately by choosing a hard measure for them, if you integrate that out, this comes out automatically. But the point about this is like here I'm looking at in the canonical ensemble. So I have some order of 1 by S. However, if I use the microcanonical ensemble where I did not have a density matrix given by e to the power minus beta h by zb, but a 1 upon something like 1 upon the dimension of the Hilbert space or something like that. So there it would be some order of 1 upon e to the power s kind of. The correction would be order of 1 upon e to the power s. So this depends on what ensemble you are really looking at. If you are looking at the canonical ensemble, you'll get a order of 1 by s. If you are looking at a microcanonical ensemble, you will get a order of 1 by e to the power s.
Well, it also depends on these operators, right? I mean, so one or two.
The only restriction on the operators is that the number of operator insertion is much smaller than the entropy of the state.
Well, I think there are special cases which one can consider in which, I mean, you can even have like 0, I mean, as these corrections in the thermodynamic limit. But I mean, in some special cases, yeah.
So here, one really needs to impose two conditions basically. The one condition is that the number of operator insertions is much smaller than the entropy of this particular state, which is given by log of n. So k should really be much smaller than log of n. And the second condition is that all these operator insertions should not take us outside this interval e plus minus delta e. So recall that all these energy eigenstates were lying in equation 15. They were all lying in e plus minus delta e. So this operator insertion should not really take us outside this interval.
Yeah. Even if you impose these two conditions, and then let me give you an example. Like if you take these operators to be stress tensors, and you confine yourself to the thermodynamic limit, which is a large system size limit, I mean, these corrections are not there.
But the point is, it's not a, so we are not really looking at the stress tensor excitations here. We are looking
at so what I'm saying is, like, if you use these operators O as some specific operators, these corrections, I mean, it is specific to what these operators which you use.
Yes. So we are not really looking at the stress tensor here. But apart from that, apart from that, this is like pretty much a theorem in statistical mechanics that you can get this equation 16.
Souvik, so are you saying the correction can be 0 for some operators?
Yeah, so if you take a 2D CFT and then you take these operators O to be the stress tensors, and you can find typical states, like, I mean, these are some descendant states.
Yeah.
And in the thermodynamic limit, if you take the large system size limit, these corrections, they fall off as some inverse power of the length, the size of the circle, or like the size of the spatial size. I mean, in the strict thermodynamic limit, this is 0, at least for the stress tensor.
I see. I mean, but that is fine for the conclusions, right? In the sense that we want the state to mimic the thermal state for certain number of operators.
Yeah. I'm just saying that this correction can be even better. I mean, in some.
I see. Yeah, it can be better. Yeah, right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but there is a reason why we don't take this. So basically, there is a reason why we don't consider this stress tensor here. The reason is basically something like this. So basically this does not, as you said, like this can be order of 1 by s can be taken to be like this correction can essentially vanish, but we do not really consider a stress tensor because in order to formulate these kind of states in the, let's say the kind of states which we are which we looked at earlier, in this equation 4, which is basically some operator insertions acting on the black hole state. In order for them to do that, if you act with this if you take this operator to be the stress tensor itself, you can show that there can be certain combinations of the stress tensor which annihilate this state itself. But we don't want any state which annihilates, because we want to use some other properties as well. So
you mean relate the typical states, or like
for this
no, that is not true. I mean, I think this was like work by Subrat and Kyriakos itself. Like,
but they did not take into account these stress tensors in the operator algebra.
Sorry.
So they did not take into account this stress
Yeah,
tensor.
but even with stress tensors, it won't. Even with stress tensors, they won't annihilate the typical state. I mean,
no, the stress tensors can actually annihilate this. So you can take like this stress tensor minus the ADM mass. Let's say you can take the Hamiltonian part. So Hamiltonian minus the ADM mass acting on this black hole state will just give you 0. So you don't want operators in the algebra which actually annihilate this.
okay.
So really this state 4 comes from something called this Tomita-Takesaki theorem. So basically what happens is, in order for one of the conditions for this Tomita-Takesaki theorem to hold is basically that you have this some von Neumann algebra acting on the Hilbert space, on a certain Hilbert space, and no operator from the von Neumann algebra actually annihilates the Hilbert space.
Mm-hmm.
So stress tensors minus minus let's say let's say one component of the stress tensor, which is the Hamiltonian minus the ADM mass, will actually annihilate the Hilbert space, and in that sense, like you cannot take this particular thing. So in this algebra of observables, which you are saying, you cannot include the stress tensor. But yeah, as you said, like for a general statistical system, yes, there can be some observables which can give you this relation exactly. Okay, so yeah. So now let us evaluate the inner product between two such states. Let's say we have these two states in equation 17, and we want to evaluate the inner product. It is trivial to show that this inner product is something like of the order of e to the power minus s by 2. So this answers your previous question also, that if you take these two states from the CFT, even if you let's say in equation 17 we have these two states which are labeled by Ti and Tj, boundary times Ti and Tj. If I take Ti minus Tj to be a very large number, then also these two states will have a very small overlap of the order of e to the power minus s by 2. So in the pure state black holes, we also have this particular kind of thing, that there is a overcounting, and in a certain sense that is the basic way in which one accommodates in which one gets all these extra vectors in the Hilbert space. So this is the paradox for the pure state black hole. It is basically more or less the same as for the eternals case, apart from the fact that you cannot reconstruct the entire region of the left CFT starting from the right CFT, because there is a cutoff which is basically the UV cutoff. So this dotted line on the left side is basically the UV cutoff. So you can reconstruct this interior regions, but you cannot go too far beyond in the left CFT region from starting from the right CFT.
Joydeep, sorry, I don't understand this diagram. So this is this doesn't look like a single-sided black hole. So what is this? No, I mean single-sided black holes don't have left and right, right?
Yes. So the CFT is my right CFT. So I am starting. I want to reconstruct these like how I want to reconstruct this black hole starting from the, let's say, the right CFT. So I can go only a finite region on the left side. I cannot go to the entire region, and that region is because we have this UV cutoff. So this dotted line is the UV cutoff. We are not exactly reconstructing the left side.
Mm-hmm.
Very close to the left,
okay,
but not exactly going to the left.
Okay, all
but
right.
Apart from that, the physical picture remains unchanged.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Okay. So now let us look at the paradox from the in the spectral observables. So why are we interested in spectral observables? It is because basically since black holes have a chaotic description, so we want to look at all these spectral observables like the level spacing distribution, and the spectral form factors, etc., and want to see what is the effect of this extra bags of Bol excitations on these observables. So let's say so since black holes are chaotic, we demand that the Hamiltonian consideration is described by a random matrix obeying Gaussian unitary ensemble statistics, and this was showed very nicely in the work of Kotler et al. So the Gaussian unitary ensemble of Hermitian matrices of dimension n cross n is defined as in equation 19. Here V square is a real number which is order 1 and does not scale with n. For a Gaussian unitary ensemble, the expression for the level spacing distribution is given by equation 20, where S is the distance between two consecutive eigenvalues. And at late times, the spectral form factors captures the magnitude of oscillations, which is given by equation 21, where the spectral form factor is defined as deforming the partition function by these factors of plus minus it and taking their product and dividing by the square of the partition function. So now we will characterize the violations in spectral properties into two different classes. The violations one are basically when this level spacing distribution has no specified distribution, and in that particular case, the spectral form factor has no correlation with the black hole spectral form factors curve. The second violation is characterized by the case when we have this energy level spacing distribution following a Gaussian unitary ensemble distribution. And in that particular case, we can show that for the bags of gold scenario, we have a different dip time, we have a different plateau time, and a different plateau height. So recall that the spectral form factors curve is characterized by something like this thing. Like you can see the red curve here. So let's just look at this red curve. So basically it starts so this is a log-log plot, by the way. And this is a plot between the spectral form factor and the time. So just look at this, let us look at this red curve. So basically this curve dips down and then it rises up and then hits a plateau. And this is the expectation which we get from a black hole's case. So in violations of type 1, we see that there is no correlation with the black hole's curve. And this is exemplified by these different cases where if we don't take Poissonian distributions, Poissonian level spacing distributions, sorry, if we don't take, if we don't take Gaussian unitary ensemble level spacing distributions, we will get all these different kind of curves, which has no correlation with the black hole spectral form factor. However, if we take this level spacing distribution to be given by this Gaussian unitary ensemble, we will get this violation too, where basically if the dimension of the Hilbert space of the black hole is n, and the dimension of the bags of gold excitation is m, we'll get this dip time as something as a different dip time, which is of the order of under root of n in the black hole's case, and the under root of m in the bags of gold case. Similarly, the plateau time, the plateau height, and the 2-point function all have drastically different properties. And this is characterized by this curve, where the black hole is like something like where the black hole is given in the red, and the bags of gold excitation is given in the blue. So here I have numerically simulated a black hole of like 100 states in red and a bags of gold distribution with 1,000 states using the form of the operators which we just saw. And yeah, basically the dip time, dip height, the plateau time, plateau height are all different for these two cases.
Joydeep, sorry, I missed what is the violation exactly?
Yes, so violation in type 2 is basically of this form, that the spectral form factors features are like numerically different for the black hole and for the black hole.
I see. Okay,
so
fine.
So this red curve is the black hole curve. The blue curve is the bags of gold curve.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Violation 1 is characterized by the spectral form factor going like anything. Like these are all like bags of gold excitations plotted. These are like looking like anything.
Okay.
We have not chosen any Gaussian unitary ensemble level spacing distribution. But even if we choose a Gaussian unitary ensemble level spacing distribution, we will get spectral form factor with different physical features.
Okay. Yeah, that's clear. Yeah, thanks.
So we now come to the resolution of these spectral puzzles using overcounting. So consider typical states. So I'll roughly give a very order of magnitude kind of argument to how these things are resolved. So let us consider typical states. Let us consider typical states defined on the interval E plus minus delta E, which represents a single-sided black hole. The partition function of the dual CFT describing the original black hole over this energy interval has the order of magnitude given in equation 23. So here we have considered delta E to be less than E, which gives us the order of magnitude of the partition function. So now if we write down the order of magnitude of the partition function, where M states span the bags of gold effective field theory Hilbert space, that has the order of magnitude given in equation 24. So recall that we have this equation 23 where the order of magnitude is order of n times e to the power minus beta e, whereas for the bags of gold case, we have m times e to the power minus beta e. So m is the dimension of the Hilbert space of the bag of gold, n is the dimension of the Hilbert space of the black hole. So this is basically the manifestation of overcounting, and this overcounting in partition function manifests itself in wrong quantitative values for the entropy of the black hole, for the spectral form factor, for the 2-point function and late times, and so on. So the resolution is basically the resolution basically is that the actual Hilbert space of the bags of gold is really spanned by these n vectors rather than this m embedded vectors. So these m embedded vectors have like very small and tiny inner products, and they are basically embedded in a much smaller Hilbert space of dimension n. And one can see that if we impose this, then the correct sum over L in equation 24 is really up to n rather than up to m. And thus we can arrive at the correct conclusion that that the partition function for the bags of gold is really of the order of n times e to the power minus beta e rather than m times e to the power minus beta e, by working with bulk states so that they have small but finite inner products. So yeah,
this n and m estimation is the same as what we discussed earlier, is it? When we discussed this vector space with vi vj less than epsilon, is that what you're saying now?
Yes. So I am saying that this is the resolution in this particular case also, that if this m vectors in equation 24 are embedded in a smaller Hilbert space which is of the order of n, then we will get the correct order of magnitude as compared to equation of the bag of gold as compared to equation 23.
I see. By construction, m is designed that way, isn't it? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
I'm just trying to understand how m scales as n, right?
This m different vectors are embedded in this n dimension smaller Hilbert space. So just like we did this particular kind of calculation. Yeah. So
yeah, exactly. Right.
Could be embedded in this smaller Hilbert space. So they have small.
Yeah. So this
overcounting puzzle in this partition as well. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, this scaling of 10 is there by construction in the bags of gold entropy, is it? That m scales like this?
In the partition function, you mean?
Sorry, yeah. When you what I mean is when you go from equation 23 to 24.
Yes.
How do you know that m has the same scaling in n as you showed just now?
So okay. So basically, if I impose that this actual Hilbert space is just n.
Yeah.
So then this sum over this quantity L in equation 24 is really up to n rather than n.
Oh, I see. You are changing the validity of 24 itself. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fine. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So this case is really over this small Hilbert space rather than the smaller Hilbert space, the actual Hilbert space of the black hole rather than of the entire bags of gold configuration. And we have valid reasons to say so, because we saw that there is some small inner products which are there in the bags of gold.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks.
So how am I doing on the time?
Yeah, you can take 15 more minutes.
Okay. So we can look at this, understand some features of this overcounting of interior excitations in the case of toy matrix models also, small n toy matrix models also. Although small n does not have a well-defined bulk dual, but we can understand some features of this overcounting in those particular cases. So let us work with a 0 plus 1D 2 matrix model. So we are looking at this 2 matrix model because we want this scaling of of the entropy to go proportional to n square. And yeah, so this is the this is the simplest matrix, simplest model which one can look at. So let us look at the Lagrangian given by equation 25, where we have these two sets of n cross n matrices, which are coupled to each other by this parameter lambda. So we have introduced this coupling lambda so that this A prime and B prime matrices are not independently diagonalized. And we also demand that this lambda is very close to 0 so that this coupling term does not have a significant contribution to the energy. And the low energy states are essentially the same as the states in the free field theory up to a very good approximation. So we will also impose that the physical observables are singlets of the gauge group. In a sense, sorry, singlets of the global group. So here we have a UN group which can act on the these matrices. So in a certain sense, this replicates features of matrix models in which matrices transform under a gauge group where the relevant observables are gauge singlets. So here it will be some global group singlets. These are very simple matrix models in which we want to these are very simple toy models in which we want to demonstrate overcounting. And so we diagonalize B prime by using this kind of transformation. Under the same transformation, A prime, so A prime is also changed, but it is not a diagonal matrix. So A prime goes into some A, which has some n square components. B prime goes into B, which has some n components. So we really have some n square plus n components. And in the large n limit, we can see that this scales as something like n square. So basically, this is the rough motivation for the, this is basically these are basically models for the like black hole in the, so which can work in the large n, but we are looking at some small n case only just to see the overcounting. Okay, so now we impose the following conditions, and these conditions are analogous to looking at the case where we have very small back reaction. So basically, none of the operators in the algebra of observables annihilate the typical state. So we'll construct a typical state in the Hilbert space, and then any operators in the algebra should not annihilate the typical state. The maximum number of operator insertion should be less than of the order of n square plus n, and the energy of operator insertion should not take us outside delta E about E in order to ensure that the back reaction is small. So these three conditions are basically demanding, in a certain sense, that the back reaction in analogous, the back reaction in, say, the bulk is really small. So these are basically, even though we do not have a bulk, but we impose these conditions just to see what is the, just to see study the Hilbert space. So it turns out that, yeah, we can embed a huge number of vectors in the approximately equidistance vectors in the Hilbert space of the interior. And yeah, so the point on these plots basically, so these plots so the plots in the blue are basically, a point on these plots correspond to absolute value of the inner product between vectors lying on the x-axis and the y-axis, and hence the x is equal to y line has the inner product equal to 1. So these are basically density plots in a certain sense. So you have this a vector on the x-axis and a vector on the y-axis. So so same vector inner product with itself is 1. That is why we have this x is equal to y line having inner product 1. And this is, and there is a scale on the right hand side of both these figures which shows the value of this inner product, modulus of the inner product at all points in the interior. So now let's say we want to recreate the situation where we introduce one excitation after a time t after the first excitation is introduced. So if time t is taken to be 0, this gives us the inner product, this gives us this is displayed in the left figure when time t is taken to be 0. But if we gradually increase the time, let's say we have one excitation and then we modulate with the similar factors as given in some equations, factors of e to the power plus minus I HRT. And if I take t to be of the order of 1000 for this particular case with 220 excitations, we have a gradual vanishing out of this inner product. Like, so the x is equal to y line had inner product equal to 1 in the case of t is equal to 0. But this x is equal to y line is gradually vanishing out. So is gradually damping out. So basically the center figure has this x is equal to y line as something like 0.7. And if I take this time separation to be very large, of the order of 10 to the power 5, so we can see that this x is equal to y line just vanishes out. So this is basically the equation. The figure on the right side is basically the demonstration of the fat tail in a certain sense. So the fat tail was when we had like very small overlaps, but these overlaps were, we expected these overlaps to go to 0, but they are not really going to 0 here. We see all these very small overlaps here. And that really is the motivation, that really in a certain sense is the demonstration of overcounting in the dual CFT. So we can do it for a different matrix model as well.
Or can I ask one?
Yeah.
So if you chose like m is equal to 104, which was the dimension of the Hilbert space,
Yes,
then you did the same thing. I mean, let's say that we don't work in the energy eigenbasis, but let's say we choose n is equal to 104 and choose equidistant vectors. And then we perform the same exercise, and does the same thing happen again, that this x is equal to y line, I mean, does it like diffuse?
So if you take m is equal to 104, you can go to a basis in which you have exactly all these non-off diagonal elements 0.
Yes, and now if you evolve it in time, do you still see this x is equal to y line diffusing and like creating large off diagonal elements, or do? Okay. I'm referring to the diagram which you have in the next slide. So
yes,
like
yes.
instead of choosing like 220, which you had, like if you just chose 104, does the same phenomenon happen?
No, in that particular case, this thing might not be washed out.
Mm-hmm.
But for this particular case where we have a certain, this particular case, we are not really looking at this energy eigenstates. So these are basically washed out if I take this time separation very large.
Right.
Because these states are really the analog of this bulk state. So yeah, bulk excitation. So we saw that this, just as we saw that this operator insertions on the states psi I and psi j, just a second. Yeah, just as we saw in equation 17, basically, if I take the inner product of these two states, we will get a very small contribution of the order of e to the power minus s by 2. Here I am not getting that much small because of the Hilbert space being very small. But if I take the Hilbert space sufficiently large, this whole thing will be very close to 0, but still non-zero.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But as you said, if I take this energy eigenstates basis, that won't like if I take the basis of energy eigenstates, we won't get that.
You won't get that. Okay. Yeah.
So similarly, we can look at another two.
Joydeep, can you just explain this a bit, because I see that the diagonal which is this x is equal to y line, that has gone away, but then most of the square was blue, right, which was close to 0 in the left ones, whereas in the right one most of the blue ones have also gone to a higher value.
Oh, that's because the scale has changed. So the scale was from 0 to 1
right,
but it is 0 to something like 0.3 or 0.25 something.
But in the middle one you have 0 to 0.6.
Yeah, something like 0.65 or something like that.
So
the
that
x is gradually vanishing. In the middle one, this x is equal to y line is no longer 1, but it's something like of the order of 0.65.
I see. Okay. Oh, it's gone from 0.6 to 0.2 because of the scale change. You are getting this. Okay, fine.
Yes. So if I place the excitations far apart from each other, these excitations don't really go to the overlap between them. Don't really go to 0, but they go down to some particular value.
Okay. Great. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
That's
thanks.
what I wanted to demonstrate. And we can demonstrate it in the case of another matrix model as well. And in this matrix, so in this matrix model described by equation 26, basically we have a 3 plus 1D 2 matrix model, and yeah, and one can do something more in this matrix model. One can look at something called this Hagedorn temperature, above which we have these black holes. And we can look at thermodynamic observables in the black hole regime, which is basically at a temperature slightly above the Hagedorn temperature. And it turns out that here also we can observe that this thing vanishes at late times. So yeah, like we had this same effect in this particular matrix. We can see the same effect in this particular matrix model as well. In a, let's say, 1,000-dimensional Hilbert space embedded within the 61-dimensional Hilbert space. So yeah, with that I'll finish this talk. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Joydeep. Let's all thank Joydeep for this nice talk.
Thank you. Joydeep, I have one question. So what does this tell us about the theories of gravity as opposed to some quantum field theory? I mean, are these excitations to be treated differently in a quantum field theory or the same conclusion?
Yes. So this was the point. Yeah. So I'll share my screen again. So this was the point which I was. So in a general quantum field theory, we would have expected that these excitations, that the coherent states which are separated far apart from each other would have a very small inner.
I see.
Would have an inner product which is going to zero. But in gravity, if I take these two states separated well far apart from each other, we would still have a very small inner product. So if the consequences of this for different physical observables will be something like, so for the spectral form factor, if we, in a certain sense, basically we would not have this kind of a resolution for this. We won't have a fat tail and other things in this kind of calculation.
Okay, I see. Okay, because I was thinking the argument that you showed with VI-Vj, that a large number of states have small inner product, that is not particular to. Okay, you're using holography. Is that what I'm supposed to understand here? Yeah. Is this specific to gravity or this is specific?
This is a very specific situation to gravity. That you have like completely different vectors from each other, but they are not really independent.
How to see that? I mean, or is it just that it has a large dimensional Hilbert space? Because I mean, this is isn't this equation 9 and 10? Are they not true for any Hilbert space? Or
so, but I can always get some vectors which have like epsilon vanishingly small in non-gravitational theories.
I see. Okay.
But in gravity, I will always have this limit, like something like this overlap will be something like of the order of epsilon.
I see. Epsilon is intrinsic to gravitational system. Okay, fine. Okay, yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So this might be slightly vague, but I just wanted to see whether this thought is correct or not. So we know, I mean, in ADS-CFT, you have this quantum error correction in the sense that the bulk Hilbert space is much bigger than the CFT Hilbert space, because as it can be seen from the root Takanagi formula. So I mean, can one like think of some reformulation of what you did? I mean, using this in the sense that since there is this overcounting, this overcounting is absent if one sees it from a purely CFT point of view, and thereby you can have some kind of resolution. Is this correct or completely wrong, or what do you think about it?
So I don't have a concrete answer to that question, but I have been thinking about this question. Is a sort of related version of this question. So the idea is that one can extrapolate some of these conclusions here, which I have just presented, to the case that even the Hawking radiation might be possibly having a smaller, the space of Hawking radiation might also might also have a smaller space, Hilbert space, and consequently maybe this might be related somehow to the island's description. So I'm not exactly sure like how to look at this particular thing, but yeah, this of course one should look at how this description goes to this kind of like Ryuta Kanagi kind of cases, but yeah, I don't have a very concrete way to look at it.
Okay. Yeah, because in this quantum error correcting story, there is, I mean, there's also precisely this overcounting thing.
Yes,
which
yes,
happens,
yes,
right?
yes, yes.
So if,
in fact, overcounting is in a certain sense, it's almost a necessity because the Bekenstein-Hawking entropy says that it's like all these excitations entropy should go as area. So if you are managing to produce more excitations, in a certain sense, they should be overcounted.
mhm.
So
Okay.
yeah, but the question is how do we relate these two kind of things? Because I don't have a very good idea of how to do that. But I've been thinking about this particular thing as well. But yeah.
I have a naive question to both of you, probably. So this is it known, like if you have some excited state in the bulk, then how to calculate the entanglement entropy using something like Ryota-Kanagi formula?
So for like low energy excitations, I think
I see.
can compute it.
Okay.
Yeah. So like if there is some excitation by some light scalar field in the bulk, I mean, you can think of this as some single trace excitation in the CFT, and then one can
I see.
calculate the entanglement entropy. Like this is the entanglement entropy of an excited state.
Right. Yeah, in the CFT, I understand. Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
And
Okay.
yeah, and since this excitation is like small energy, like this is like a quantum correction to the standard entanglement entropy, and then one can recover this by using this Faulkner-Lekowitz-Maldacena
Right.
proposal. I mean, in
So this formula for this generalized entanglement entropy, basically, you can get it from.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other question, let me ask one question. So Jaideep, so the resolution came from this this fact tail effect, where you had like so it basically came from the fact that you had a finite central charge.
Yes.
So, and so for semi-classical things, we know that a semi-classical field theory in the bulk is dual to like infinite n CFT. So in that case, I mean, we do have that the fact that there's no fat tail, because that's n goes to infinity.
Sorry. We have a fat tail of the order of e to the power minus n, but n goes to infinity. You can take
Yeah. Yeah, in that sense. But of course, so it's really the quantum gravity effects when you turn on finite n that is saving you here. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So that's what I wanted to ask. And the second thing I wanted to ask was, even if you consider these, the kind of question that one asks here is like about these slices, infinite volume slices, and then you're looking at field theory on infinite volume slices. But have people actually looked at field theory there, and have they found that, I mean, there are no IR issues because if I just want to do field theory in such inflationary slices, it seems that there could be IR issues there. So is that something people have checked, like just trying to?
Yeah. So first of all, I was not looking at this infinite volume slices. I was looking at this maximum volume slices between these 2 points in the let's say u of r comma 0 and v of r comma 0. I was looking at the maximum volume slices there. And yeah, if you are right that these volume of these slices approach infinity if I take this UR or VR very large, and this entropy going as a function, as a proportional to this volume, is exactly a reflection of this IR divergence in a certain sense.
I see.
So just so you can think of it as a dilute gas which is living on a very large volume with a constant density. So the entropy will just blow up, which will just go proportional to volume. So it is the IR issue itself. So this is the physical observable which captures in a certain sense. It goes proportional to the volume, and in a certain sense, it captures the IR.
So if one does it with IR regulator, has anyone checked what happens if IR issues are, someone tries to regulate it, and what happens?
Yeah, it will, okay. So in the case of this, okay.
Normally, isn't it already regulated, this UR and being not very large?
I don't know. I mean,
because that is what controls the volume, right?
yeah. I mean, yeah.
No, I did not get the question.
I'm just asking.
Can you repeat that once more? Like, I did not get the question very precise.
So you were asking.
Was it to me or was it to Nirmal?
Yeah, no, I was asking if there are indeed any IR issues in this field theory, and supposing maybe there are not, because these are finite volume slices.
No, I mean, Nirmal was asking about the regulators.
Yeah.
So I was saying, isn't this UR the regulator, because that keeps you at a finite volume?
Yeah, in a certain sense, UR is the regulator, but he's probably asking for the case of like infinite, like when you take this UR, you are going to you not going to zero or B not going to zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as I know, like all the there is no nice way to remove these divergences, IR divergences in field theory apart from putting it in a box or something like that. As Subramania was saying, where if you restrict it to a particular box like thing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks, Joydeep. I'll stop recording now, unless there are further questions. Okay. Thanks again. Have a nice talk.
Thank you all.